My guest today on episode 53 of the Ikigai Podcast is Kiku Day. Kiku Day is a Shakuhachi player and a PhD ethnomusicologist and a world traveler from Copenhagen, Denmark. Kiku's work lies at the intersections of performance of traditional Shakuhachi music, contemporary music, and improvisation, ethnomusicology, history, politics, meditation, and writing. Kiku, you studied Shakuhachi with Okuda Atsuya, one of the foremost performers of Jinnashi Shakuhachi in Tokyo for 11 years before you returned to Europe to study ethnomusicology at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. You are the founding member of the European Shakuhachi Society, and you dedicate yourself to performing Jinnashi Shakuhachi, both Honkyoku and contemporary music. And I think we'll get into the meaning of those words in a minute. And you also teach Shakuhachi online. Thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. That's quite a CV, and that's only a small part of it. So your life and what you've done sounds quite amazing. But I discovered that you were born in one of my favorite suburbs in Tokyo, Harajuku. So would you like to give us a little bit of background about the earlier years of your life?
Well, certainly. I love the fact that you say that it's a suburb. I never thought of it like a suburb. It's one of the centers in central Tokyo, I would say. I love that. Harajuku as a suburb. I'm sure it was a suburb when my grandmother lived there. She said that she saw tanuki and other, animals.
Oh, wow.
Quite sure that you don't do that anymore. Yes, so yeah, I'm born in Harajuku. So my father is American from St. Louis, Missouri, and my mother is also born in Harajuku, just like my grandmother is. Although my grandmother's family moved to Harajuku, I think, is some years before my grandmother was born. So I think her siblings are born in Marunouchi. So there's not so much to say about, I suppose, because I already left Japan when I was 5,
Mm.
but I did go to the kindergarten there, Togo Jinja kindergarten. So at that time, even though that it's so central Tokyo, I was the only child with mixed background. So I was weird. I mean, we had parents coming to see me, to check
Oh, really?
how
Okay.
when you're half. I'm sure if you go to kindergarten today in Harajuku, there will be quite a few mixed race children. But at that time, it was still novelty. So yeah, so I was there with my parents and my grandparents in Harajuku, and my father actually moved, or rather, he fled to Sweden because he was a Vietnam War denier and a communist.
Oh,
So FBI came to Japan, and he was helped by but that's a very long, different story. So
okay.
that's actually also why one of the reasons for we moved to Scandinavia, that we were supposed to follow up, but um, then we ended in Denmark.
I see. Okay. Wow, I wasn't expecting to hear all that. So I was going to say that when I went to Harajuku, that was the mid 90s. So I imagine now and back in the 90s, it was very different to what it was like in your childhood. It's this very trendy area, and I love to go
Yeah,
there to
yeah,
go to Meiji Jingu, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I used to play in Meiji Jingo
Oh,
as a
nice.
little, yeah. No, in the 90s it was already kids town or youth town, and my family had to move in the 90s because it was just terrible. You couldn't even get train ticket without queuing for a long time. But no, so Takestodori, which is one of the main shopping kids area kind of thing, used, I remember actually, like fishmonger, you know vegetable shop and these kind of things.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it was quite different when I
Mm.
was a kid. Mm.
Yeah, no, I've got good memories of Harajuku when I first went to Japan, and don't think They do this now, but they used to have rockabilly dancers and people dressing up like Elvis and
Oh,
embracing all these American
they still have
culture.
that.
Yeah.
They still have that. Yeah. In the 90s, the whole road was, yeah, didn't have traffic during Sundays, I think. That is long gone.
Yeah.
But so the musicians moved into the Yoyogi Park.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, I actually went on a Sunday and experienced that the road was closed. And I think I had a Lonely Planet guide and that recommendation to go check it out. So it brings back
It was
some
fun.
fond memories. But let's move
Yeah.
on to the topic of this episode. And it's about this beautiful instrument, the shakuhachi. But maybe a lot of my audience don't really know what it is. So what is the shakuhachi and what is the meaning of the name?
The shakuhachi, the name means 1.8. So one shaku. So shaku is one unit of a measurement. It's very often translated as foot.
Mm.
I don't know if that's a good translation, but anyway, it's a unit of measurement, and so 1.8 hachi, hachi sun. You just don't say sun, and that is the length, the standard length of the shakuhachi, and that's why it got the name. It's got this name for a very long time because it already had this name when it was imported from China. Oh, well, it's more complicated than that. But it used to be a part of a Chinese court ensemble. And it was a Tang Dynasty kind of ensemble and music that Japan imported from Korea in the 8th century. And at that time in the 8th century, it was already outdated in China, but it was still going on in Korea. And this ensemble and music is still going on as court music in Japan, gagaku, but it doesn't exist in Korea anymore. So the shakuhachi was part of that, but it looked very, very different. It was much smaller, much thinner, and had 6 holes. Today, it's made out of Japanese bamboo, so it's a bamboo flute,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got 5 holes, so it plays more Japanese scale modality.
Yeah, when I first started to develop an interest in it, I was kind of surprised by the name because the name's this exotic sounding name, and then I think, oh, it's just yeah, basically 1 foot 8, um, 8, so she means 8, and I was thinking, oh, that's unusual. So I had this preconceived idea that it meant something, very special.
Yeah, something very deep or something.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then I was surprised that it's not really based on a pentatonic scale, but I play guitar in blues. There's the pentatonic scale, which is 5 notes. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. But you
Yes.
play jinashi as well. So we should touch on what jinashi is. Jinashi shakuhachi.
Yeah, jinashi. So nashi means no, no existence of a, and or there isn't any. So G, what is G then? It's because in modern times, maybe from the beginning of the Meiji era, that is 1868. Around that time, already before and certainly after, the shakuhachi's construction was changed a lot because the environment changed, and it became part of an ensemble. And then, of course, you have to play in tune with them, and you have to maybe have a different sonority or whatever. But it inspired for a more precise construction of the instrument, and so the bore, the inside, is rebuilt with a thick paste called G,
Ah,
and
okay.
which is a mixture of like polishing powder, and so a kind of a stone, light stone, and the Japanese traditional lacquer urushi. And so that is why, and then the maker can much more control the inside, when you can add material.
Okay.
Before, you would just subtract, you would file away the notes or these kind of things. So that was the only means. But then you had also the uneven bore, of course, of the bamboo itself. So that is the difference. And the reason for I played jinashi was, of course, also just a chance I had meeting my teacher who only plays jinashi shakuhachi. But I also think that it was very important for me that I encountered jinashi shakuhachi because I am such a timbre freak and I just absolutely love the timbre of this instrument.
I see.
The modern instruments is more closer to the flute, that I came from, the traverse flute, in some ways. So I really enjoy this complex and also to some degree surprising timbres of the jinashi shakuhachi.
See. Well, thank you for that. And that relates to, I guess, it seems from what I know that jinashi is the shakuhachi you play for honkyoku.
Yes.
And so what is honkyoku?
Honkyoku is the name that was given to the repertoire that the monks called komuso played during the Edo period. So the Edo period is from 1603 to 1868. During that time, there were a group of people that kind of got together. There were like people just who started to play the shakuhachi for alms, so they would use the shakuhachi as for begging.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got more and more organized into what they later called the Fuke sect. Although it's called the sect, it proved that it's actually not really recognized as a Buddhist sect, but it is considered to be a Buddhist sect. And it was sect enough so that they could, at checkpoints when you, for example, crossed borders, because Japan was several countries in the Edo period. Mm-hmm. When they crossed borders, they could show which temple they came from. So it was sect enough for that.
I see.
But if we as academics look into it now, it's obvious that it wasn't. Which is part of the shakuhachi's really complex background, because also in Japan I've always been told that they were monks and it was a Buddhist sect and these kind of things, but there's still a lot to really understand about the shakuhachi background.
See. Okay.
So
you're still...
we're still kind of looking into what's what. And so honkyoku is the pieces that these monks they played, and there were temples scattered all over the countries, and very often the temples had their own corpus of repertoire, pieces that they will play. So that's what we call honkyoku.
And these are solo pieces?
Yes, because mostly there are a few examples of duets, but mostly solo pieces, yeah.
Okay. So this leads to the question, when did you start learning shakuhachi?
That I started to study shakuhachi with Okuda in 1990. So, it's already quite a few years ago, 33 years ago. So I was doing the entrance examination for the conservatory here on flute, and I just heard the shakuhachi. A friend wanted me to listen to this recording, and I heard it, and I just absolutely adored the sound. And I had been thinking about, it would be nice to check out where my parents are from. So I hopped on the Trans-Siberian Railroad and took the train to Japan.
Wow. So before hearing that music that your friend played for you, did you know the shakuhachi? Were you?
Not at all.
No? Okay, wow.
I wasn't exposed to any Japanese music, traditional music at all.
Wow. I see. Well, there you go. So it's amazing how one piece of music can radically change your life, change the course of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would be curious to know what recording it was. Who was it I heard? I have no idea. I wasn't particularly interested. It was just the sound. It's like, wow, I'd rather play that.
It's fascinating. It is, yeah. There is something about the sound of a shakuhachi. It's organic. It's has this mystique and this beauty, and it, in a way, doesn't sound like a musical instrument. It sounds more connected to nature or to the earth.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah, yeah. But it certainly can create beautiful music as well.
Mhm.
And so let's move on to your sensei, I guess,
Mhm.
Okuda Atsuya, and you studied with him for 11 years. So that's quite a long relationship between student and teacher. Can you go into the teacher-student relationship with the shakuhachi?
Yes. Of course, I can only base it mostly on myself, but of course also what I, as a musicologist, have asked other people how were their relationship to their teacher. Of course, the teacher would always be a very important figure when you are learning something that becomes such an important part of your life. But there's something about the shakuhachi teacher that becomes almost like a life learning, life teaching person, you know. And so Okuda taught the Jinasi Shakuhachi, and he was very open to the way of teaching. You know, the very traditional way of teaching such an instrument like the shakuhachi would be that the teacher would have certain times of the week where that's open for lessons, and you will just go there, and you can go once a week, once a month, once every half year, or every day of these, you know, opening times. So it's all up to you, kind of. And then you go, and then you might have to sit in a queue and wait for it to be your turn, and you will be listening to the other students study. So that is the very traditional way. Okuda didn't do it like that. Okuda actually scheduled his lessons, and I will go for that hour. That was my lesson. But he was very open to any kind of, you know, how often or how little you want to study.
Mm-hmm.
So I had periods during these 11 years that I say I studied with him, because in a way, I still feel like I study with him. I do still take lessons with him, which is a very typical for shakuhachi.
Oh, wow.
But not like, you know, a scheduled thing. You know, I don't go every week or every month or. Yeah, so I would sometimes go 3 times a week and stay for 1, 2, 3 hours, and we'll just play together. So it was a quite an intense shakuhachi time, but also during that period I thought it was quite hard to be in Japan as a half Japanese person.
Mm-hmm.
So I did also go out of Japan. Then I traveled quite a bit, but I will travel very slowly, and I will play a lot during my travels, kind of to internalize the new that I had learned.
I see. Yeah, I should mention my son's half Japanese, and he was he actually had his first year in, I guess, kindergarten, or is it hoakuen or yochien, and he was very attractive. He had this beautiful face and this sort of blonde, almost red tinged hair. So he did get a lot of positive attention, but yeah, we had concerns about his upbringing, and we thought in the end Australia was this multicultural that probably we thought was be more relaxed for him. So yeah, the half experience. I've had a few guests who have either left Japan out of frustration, or they've lived in two countries and they've not felt that they're American, or not felt that they're Japanese. They're sort of stuck in between. So
we do get stuck in between, and people always want to put you into boxes, you know.
yes.
The darker my hair got, the more Japan box I got. It was kind of amazing, actually. But anyway.
Yeah, so let's go back, because I have this impression that the lessons were always one-on-one, And rather than playing a score of music, it would be imitation with your
Yes,
teacher.
although that the scores exist and you do use your score especially as a memory aid, and the ultimate goal is to memorize the pieces and play them by heart. But many of us go in and out of memorizing and forgetting again and these kind of things. But yes, imitation is a big thing. So I think most of the time when I was introduced to a new piece, we will go through it phrase by phrase, and if there were new fingerings or new techniques, Okuda would show and explain. And then it was all about playing together, actually. And so when you play together, you try to, as student, play as close as you can
Mm-hmm.
to the teacher, and you do that again and again. I'm sure there are pieces that I played with him for 100 times. Just go through it again and again, playing together. And yeah, it's a very interesting, in a way, well, pedagogy, or in some ways also lack of pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course pedagogy has creeped in much more now, and now they start with little children's songs or these kind of things for beginners. But I was thrown into a honkyoku from the beginning,
Okay.
and yeah, and but I also experienced that this way of learning where you imitate, you play along with your teacher again and again. And this is not, by the way, I have to say something, because it's not all teachers who teach like that. I know, for example, in Kinko Ryu, I interviewed myself, a Kinko Ryu player, when he studied with the great Yamaguchi Goro. They would go through pieces, they would learn the first time, maybe half of it, and then the next time the next half, and then they will play through a couple of times and then move on to the next. So for them, it's not so much the repetition of playing together, but in my case, it was really playing together again and again. And in that way, you slowly get soaked into
Mm-hmm.
the flow, the sound, and all these little details that you almost learn without you're conscious about it. And it sinks in very deep. For example, I started playing piano when I was 3, and I've already always learned like classical music, Western classical music, and I was one of those that you make jokes about, that you can't play without having a score in front of you. So for me, improvisation was something that was very strange, a very different planet in some ways. But then after all these shakuhachi training, I started improvising, and suddenly that was something that felt much more natural, even though I wasn't playing what I was usually doing. So it has, certainly for me, entered my body, certainly embodied it in a different way than I did with my other musical training. So I found that to be very interesting.
I have this impression that the music's free in a way. It's perhaps open to interpretation, and I have the impression like you're not practicing with a metronome, or you're not worried about a key signature. And I've looked at the score of a shakuhachi, and it's sort of characters, and there doesn't seem to be a time signature or a speed that you should be playing at. So do you learn the music from your teacher? And so would that mean pieces of music change or evolve or over time?
Um, all music change and evolve. Here's the ethnomusicologist speaking. Even classical music, you take a recording from 1950s and one from recently, you will hear a difference. A full orchestra playing, the pitch is different, the tempo is different, the way you play, the way you phrase, it's different. And So, but of course, with the shakuhachi being the honkyoku at least being so less fixed, let's say in that way, it can evolve much more. You listen to teacher student and you hear a big difference, even though that you also hear the connection very much. And yes, there's no, in the score that I follow, for example, that's written by Okuda, there's no tempi, there is no time signature and these kind of things, but if you go into some other schools, there will be a rhythm, so they will have dots that show the rhythm, so that you know how long a note is. But in the case of Honkyoku, the way that I learned it, so the flow is actually, I actually find the flow to be some of the most difficult to really grasp. I could play, I knew already how to blow, to use my breath, and the fingering is maybe not, that difficult, but the flow of the piece was really a hard thing to grasp. And you do this by playing along with your teacher.
Okay. Well, I guess if you want to get proficient, you'd have to spend a lot of time with your teacher.
You can do it differently, but this is certainly one way. Yeah.
Let's talk a little more about your teacher, Okuda. And I found out from your paper, he was very much into Zen Buddhism. And you wrote that you actually did not listen carefully to his explanations of the connection between Shakuhachi and Zen Buddhist philosophy. But there were two concepts that stayed with you. So would you like to touch on those two? Because when I read them, I thought, wow, that sounds very Zen. So
yeah, I just want to say that I am not sure that Okuda is into Zen Buddhism in the sense of like being a practitioner of Buddhism, but he's a thinker, and Zen Buddhist philosophy is certainly a thing that he's very much into. Yes, so these two concepts that that you read about is Okuda was talking about the complexity of the sound, and in this case, the Jinashi Shakuhachi, definitely. And he would very often say that this one single sound should correspond to the sound of the whole universe. It should, in a way, I understood it like it should contain the sounds of the whole universe, kind of thing. And of course, that's very broad and that's very big. So how do you do that in a single sound? Maybe it's more philosophical than practical, But certainly there is this aim. In my training, that was very big. He said it very often. And one is also the complexity of the shakuhachi sounds. You change timbre all the time, a tone color, and that is part of this thing about the sound of the whole universe also. And of course also the other concept that you noticed in my paper is the union of opposites in one sound or in the music. So you have rough sounds, you have very refined sound, you have very bright sounds, very dark sounds, and all these kind of things. And for me, yeah, those two concepts were very important in the way of learning shakuhachi, trying to express and also to accept sounds. The shakuhachi has a timbre that when you play in a certain position, you've got different head positions. You always have some kind of windy sound to it. So it will always be a little bit airy or a little bit noisy in some ways. And you have to accept that as a part of the shakuhachi timbre. And then you can also change your head position, the way of blowing. You change the shape of your mouth, and then you have very, very clean, pure sounds. musical sound, and you can go completely into what we would easily say noise, so non-musical sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so he made the spectrum of sounds very broad.
Yes, when I practice, I sort of have this belief I'm never ever going to play the same sound again. There's this, it's so subtle, like a slight movement or the position on my lip or my breath or my posture seems to impact the sound. And so sometimes I'll pick it up and I think, wow, I've really got a nice tone. And then I'll try again and then I've lost it. So it's
Definitely. Of course, with training, you get better at controlling that. However, I find the shakuhachi to be such a mirror of your state of being. So if I am not feeling good myself, the sound's never gonna be, great. So it really reflects you. I find it hard to use as a means of comforting myself if I'm not feeling well. Oh, I'll play a bit of shakuhachi and I'll feel better. You can of course feel better because you're doing something, that you love, but sometimes you can hear in the sound that you're not feeling well. So,
so it's like the shakuhachi knows. It knows you're not in a good mood, so maybe you should do something else. That's interesting. So let's talk about your paper, Mindful Playing, a practice research investigation into shakuhachi playing and meditation. And yeah, I remember one day I thought, I wonder if there's a research paper on shakuhachi. And I thought, there's probably not. But I put it in either Google Scholar or ResearchGate, and I was shocked to find your paper. I was like, wow. So I thought, this is going to be great. And so I reached out to you, but it's quite a read, and you've put a lot of effort and a lot of research and all these citations into this paper. So what motivated you to write this paper?
So the shakuhachi has this ambiguous Zen Buddhist background, and in Japan it's not that it takes up a lot of space, this background. So people in Japan mostly don't get to the shakuhachi through Zen Buddhism or these kind of things. It's part of the musical corpus, traditional musical corpus in Japan. Of course, there is a whole world, a little bit not as shiny and out there like the mainstream shakuhachi that's all about the music, and you can be educated as a shakuhachi player at the conservatory and things like that. And that's a very musical approach, an artistic musical approach. And of course there is in Japan this other approach that is a little bit more subdued and the Buddhist approach. But a lot of non-Japanese shakuhachi players are very interested in this side of the Zen Buddhist side, and also about meditation. And I've done a lot of interviews with non-Japanese players, and quite a few of them will say, I play shakuhachi as a means of meditation. I came to it because I wanted to meditate, and also they look at the shakuhachi playing as meditation and connects it to the Komuso monks. We don't exactly know if they thought about it as meditation, but it's part of this Komuso monks thing was also, of course, self-cultivation, but it's so much complex, so let's not go into that, because then I'll talk about that the rest of the time.
Okay.
Or it will be a 5-hour podcast. Yeah. So, but because of this interest, and I myself didn't come to the shakuhachi with the interest of Zen Buddhism or meditation. I came to shakuhachi because of the sound purely. But as I learned, and Okuda of course spoke quite a bit about Zen Buddhism, but there is a great consciousness about that it was a Zen Buddhist instrument. So I began to be interested in it, and very differently, apart from the shakuhachi, I also got into meditation. And in the beginning, I didn't connect the two at all. And then, very naturally, I suppose, in a way, because the shakuhachi has this part of history, I wanted to explore. And I found out that, it's actually not that easy. So I wanted to explore what is it, if we don't know if the Komuso monks, they meditated or not, but if so many people are interested in the shakuhachi because of the meditation part of it, so how do you actually meditate? So I was very much interested in that. What do you do to meditate while playing an instrument? Because it was always talked about, like, oh, I meditate when I play shakuhachi, but how? What do you do, kind of thing?
Yes. Well, that leads to an interesting question. And our audience, I think, will have a vague or perhaps a strong idea of what meditation is. But you define it in your paper. So how do you define it in this context of mindful playing?
Let's, so what is meditation? Because of the mindfulness movement, which has, by the way, been a really, really important movement. It's also made meditation mainstream. But mindfulness came out of, the aim of stress reduction and these kind of things. So it's very much about relaxation. But I don't think that meditation is about relaxation as such. It's like a prerequisite for meditation. You have to get into this relaxed meditative state of being, and then I think you can maybe do the work that meditation is. But it all also depends on your training and style. So I don't want to come with one type of definition and say that is it, kind of thing. But if you do come into a very relaxed state of being, which is very important, because in meditation it's a lot about letting go of many things. Your first of all, your tensions in the body. So that's where meditation is fantastic as stress reduction. You go into a very deep relaxation state in some ways, but then you have to also let go of your agendas, like your ego, and you have to be willing to throw yourself into this state of nothingness. And what is that? And I can't tell you, because I'm not a great practitioner of meditation.
Really?
So
I find that hard to believe, but
but you have to be able to kind of go into the state of nothingness, or there's the I'll try to have this bi-directional kind of awareness. And what is that? It's, we always have this two-sided. There's me, and there's everything else, and you're trying to kind of break down these borders within yourself, and it requires a lot of practice to try to get rid of your ego. Your ego is straight there, and resisting, because it doesn't want to go away, obviously. It's perfectly happy, and with all your thoughts and all this that you occupy yourself with, to stop that. So, yeah, I don't know if that was anywhere close to any definition of meditation, but
that's okay. It's definitely difficult, but something that jumped out at me on your paper was you wrote on the difference between flow and meditation. And maybe some people do perceive flow as like a meditative state, because you have this experience of loss of time, and you're deeply focused, and it generally, it feels right, or it feels good. But there is a difference. Yeah, and you share this experience of performing at St. John's Smith Square in London, which is apparently quite a venue to play at. And so you documented this experience, and I think it maybe articulated the difference, at least for you, between flow and meditation. So would you like to share that experience and what you learned from it?
Yes. So let me say that in meditation, you never, the awareness is always there. You don't lose yourself. Once you're lost into your experience, and the awareness is no longer aware, kind of, if you understand what I mean. So what happened at St. John's Square, Smith Square, is that I got onto stage and was gonna play a piece that I love and I feel comfortable with, but still is enough of a challenge. And I played it, and I got into this flow state, and normally it would be just a flow state that's great to be in as a musician. It's just flowing out of you. You don't have to think. It's just there. And of course, it's a piece that I have memorized. I don't have to read. I can just go into myself, and it just flows out. It feels great. And, but for some reason that day, and this state I think all musicians know when performing, but that day there was suddenly a type of awareness that popped up, and I realized I was in this flow state. I also realized while it was going on that I didn't know where in the music I was. And had I just been immersed in this flow state, it didn't matter because it was just flowing, and I wouldn't be worried about it. But because I had this suddenly a strange awareness, this awareness become really worried that I wouldn't know what note I should play next. So what if it stopped? So I tried with this part of me to find out where I was. So I listened to myself playing as it was still flowing. It's kind of strange because and I don't know how long this lasted, probably not very long, but I experienced it as very long. I tried to find different strategies. So I played this and this note, so it must be this that comes later. No, it wasn't that. So it must be there. And at some point I realized I had to stop worrying, because otherwise I will stop the flow state. And maybe I wouldn't know where I was. So I kind of let go of it. And then the next time I was aware of it, I was just in a normal, state of being, out of the flow, but still playing because I could play this piece. And, so I managed to get through the piece without, this stopping that I was afraid of. But it made me really think, so what is this flow state? I've completely forgotten myself. It was just flowing, and meditation is not about forgetting yourself, because then you're immersed in the experience. And experience is one thing that takes you away from meditation itself. So that's when I really started wondering, where, what happens, and what is meditation and music? We say it so easily, but what is it then? And that's when I kind of embarked into trying to find out, at least for myself.
It almost sounds like it was like an out of body experience, or you were this heightened awareness or this intense observer, but you were aware of your awareness. Yes, so, but it must have been significant, because it sounds like you hadn't had that experience before.
No, and I haven't had it like that since either. It was like right now it feels like once in a lifetime. It's actually 10 years ago. It was in 2013. Oh, can that be right? No, it must be more. It must have been like 2008. Yeah. So
There you go.
more, and I haven't had exactly that since. Luckily, because it wasn't particularly pleasant. then I would prefer either to be in just flow state and just let it flow, or in another awareness kind of state. Uh, the two combined was very weird.
It does sound weird because it sounds like you were in this heightened, anxious state. You were, you were worried while you were in flow.
I got into an anxious state. It wasn't in the beginning. In the beginning, when it just started, it just came like that. Poof, It was like, oh my God, it's just flowing out of me. I have no idea where in the music I am. It's just flowing. How nice is that? But then it started the what if I
then your
didn't know
mind started. Your mind started talking to you, saying,
Yes, but the interesting thing was they didn't stop the flow, which I think normally when you get these kind of thoughts, you would actually come out of your flow state, but it didn't at that time.
And you were very familiar with that piece. It sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah, so it is fascinating, all these concepts like flow and meditation, and studying Ikigai's made me realize I really need to understand these concepts. And so flow is a good example. I think everyone has this idea flow is something you can ease into. And sometimes I think you can, but it's defined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi as having a certain skill set to meet a certain challenge. So it shouldn't be too easy and it shouldn't be too hard. So I think the same is for meditation. We have some idea of it, but some people think it's floating into bliss, where you described it as it's almost like work. Like it is hard to try to meditate. I spent time at a Chan Buddhist center, so a Chinese Zen Buddhist center. And yeah, it was like, do I want to go tonight? Like, it's not like it's really enjoyable. It's like I've got to try and calm my mind and sit still and breathe quietly and control my thoughts. So it's not always pleasant. It's quite challenging.
Yeah, in a way, it's easier to stay in your normal kind of mind where thoughts are going. You have thoughts all the time. It's very hard to stop them. Even if you're not thinking thoughts, do I like this or do I not like this, or do I want this or do I not want this? And so you're making all these choices and all this. And that was also partly what I thought was really challenging in the beginning, and still, when playing Shakuhachi and trying to meditate. Because how could I meditate and therefore trying to kind of be in nothing, kind of mind of nothingness or bidirectional mindset, which is very high and high aim. And at the same time, I have to correct myself, I have to correct my embouchure, I have to correct everything. How do I do that at the same time? That was really a challenge, because it's hard enough to meditate sitting on your pillow or cushion, and try to let go, try to get into, try to do whatever you do in your style of meditation. But when you are actually occupied with doing something else, how do you do it at the same time? I thought that was amazingly difficult challenge.
Well, when I think about the shakuhachi, certainly as a beginner, that would, if your intention was, well, I want to take up shakuhachi to meditate, I think that's very challenging, because it's quite hard to produce your first sound, and as we mentioned before, posture and breath, and you said you kind of have to be already relaxed to connect with the shakuhachi. You can't be tense or stressed. But it is an interesting idea. So perhaps when you are very proficient, then this idea of connecting it to meditation is a possibility. And I imagine you do become one with your shakuhachi after years of practice. And I'm looking at all these, this line of shakuhachi behind you, and I'm wondering if they all have a personality, or if there's one in particular you feel very connected to. So do you have like a unique relationship with each shakuhachi?
Yes, and yes, you're right. I have a quite collection here.
Yes.
I'm not the biggest collector though, but it's also because my teacher Okuda Atsuya, he also trained us in making shakuhachi. So I've
Oh,
made like a fourth of these. He took us out in the mountains, and you have to dig your own bamboo and dry it, and then he will make workshops on making, helped by a great maker called Murai Eigoro. So yes, so part of it is that, and another part is also that I am not absolutely not the earliest, but I'm one of the earlier female shakuhachi players. So I had a lot of support, and I suppose I'm one of the very early Jinashi shakuhachi female shakuhachi players. So I had a lot of support. I had quite a few shakuhachi given to me as gifts, as an encouragement to continue in some ways,
oh,
and
good.
absolutely grateful for that and for all the support that I received. So part of it is why I have this collection, because I'm actually not a collector as a personality,
I see.
but also because Okuda's way of playing, he played all kinds of lengths. So I was supposed to learn one piece, and he would say, "Okay, let's play it on this size. It fits the piece really well." So I've learned in that way. So I do use quite a big range of shakuhachi in order to play the repertoire.
I see. That makes sense. And I do notice you sort of have them lined up from, highest to shortest. And so every shakuhachi would have its unique key center. So they're all
So yeah,
different. It reminds me of a documentary, what you said about how Okuda encouraged you and obviously showed you how to build one. And this documentary was this recognition that when you cut a bamboo tree, you are taking a life. And so that you must then respect this piece of bamboo, and you're having a relationship with it as you play it, and you should obviously look after it and respect it. And so that was sort of a fascinating insight. When I pick up my guitar, I don't think I've taken, a life. I don't think I've taken a life. I better play the guitar with care and respect. I just sort of play some, riff. So do you feel
yeah,
that? Did you have that kind of experience that, I'm taking a life in a
yeah.
way, and I should look after this instrument?
I've heard this before, and I would say that Okuda didn't talk about it that way. So, but however, when you go into this bamboo forest, and you probably have seen bamboo forest, you go in and it's just so beautiful and it's so nice, and you see a bamboo that will be suitable for the shakuhachi that you want to make, and you dig it up, you do get a special relationship with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, if you do it a lot, if you are a maker, maybe not, but for somebody like me who made maybe like 20, 30 shakuhachi in my life and won't make any more because I'm not a maker, it is very special. I remember, for example, this one here. Now it's out of your sight, but this
I
one,
can
oh
see
no,
that.
it
Yeah.
isn't. Um, I remember it when I encountered it in the bamboo forest. I was walking, and then I felt a call. I didn't hear it, I felt it. And then I looked that direction, and here was the bamboo. I felt it called me. And I digged it up, and it became one of my favorite shakuhachis, and it still is. And so you do get a special relationship to it, definitely.
Mhm. Well, on the theme of relationship, I've been exploring this Japanese concept of ma, and it's quite hard to understand, but it seems to be in all aspects of Japanese fine art or craft or music. And
Definitely.
it's a fascinating concept, and it seems to touch on maybe that idea of the union of opposites. And so what is ma, and is it important for music, especially playing shakuhachi?
Definitely, it is very important. Ma is very often translated as the in between, the space between the silence between notes in case of music. Very often in calligraphy or brush painting, it's the space that's not painted on. So that is how it's mostly translated. But in case of music, it can't just be the space between the notes, the space between the breath. It's certainly a big part of ma, because that's where you really feel it, you hear it, the absence of sound.
Mm.
However, it's also got something to do with the flow, again, flow of the piece. How do you phrase it? So ma in some ways is both in the absence of sound, but also certainly also part of the sound itself. So it's basically how the piece flows, because there, the silence is also included. How big a pause do you take between the breath, the phrases? So while you're taking a breath, and these kind of things, how fast a breath do you take? If you're playing Bach, you go because there
Yes.
isn't any space, right?
There's no pauses. Yeah.
Yeah. While in Shakuhachi you can take all the space almost. Well, that's a little bit, of course, exaggerated, but to make the point that there isn't any particular rhythm that you have to follow in the honkyoku that I play, at least. So therefore, it's up to you. So it's very much embedded in the aesthetic of the music.
It seems very much embedded in Japanese culture, and it is. I do reflect on a lot of Japanese cultural aspects and this idea and appreciation of silence or space, to the point where it's in so much of art or craft or no theatre, this emphasis on silence during performance. And I guess Japanese grow up learning it sort of naturally and intuitively, whereas it kind of needs to be explained to a Western audience, the space
I suppose
between.
it is. Yeah, I suppose it is in the culture, but I mean, the modern lives of Japanese are no different, I think, than modern
Yes.
lives of anybody like in Europe or I suppose in Australia or US and these kind of things too. So do they learn it? I think it's still embedded in the culture enough that they have a sense of it,
Yes.
because it is in the art forms that you will see around, but whether the Japanese understands it more than anybody else, I have my doubts at times. But
No, I understand. Yeah, it's something very intuitive, or they
Mm.
don't realize they understand. And then maybe it does take a foreigner to say, "Oh, Mars, fascinating, and tell me about it." And they'll go, "Well, I don't really know anything about it." But once you start talking about it, they go, "Oh, okay. That's the
Yeah,
intellectual description of what I already understand from life experience."
yeah, that could
Yeah,
be certainly, yeah. Mm?
maybe happens. Yeah.
Definitely.
So now I learned a very interesting proverb from your paper. Maybe it's something you're striving to achieve. And this is why I love the Japanese language. I always learn something. So it's Ichion Jobutsu, So what is that, and how close are you to experiencing that?
So yes, Ichion means one sound. Jobutsu means becoming Buddha. So basically, it means attaining enlightenment through one note. And that's, of course, where the concept of the whole universe in one note kind of comes in. Of course, how far I am, I think I'm very far. I don't, I mean, I think enlightenment is something that only a few of us attain. And I think I'm very far from it, and I definitely don't think it's in this lifetime. So, and I don't know if I really play the shakuhachi for with this aim. I wouldn't say it's 100% absent, the aim, but I don't think so much about it.
No, no.
And even when I sit in meditation on my cushion, because I live at a meditation center here in Denmark, although you can say the ultimate goal is enlightenment, but I think I have to take my baby steps before, I can talk about running or.
Is I wouldn't call this a goal, but is one of the joys, or the, I guess, music's expression. It's this creative medium to express yourself, and that's this intrinsic motivating factor of why people play instruments. So when you practice and when you play, do you see it as you're expressing yourself rather than you're performing a piece? Or is it
That's a
both?
good question. I suppose it's both, but when I am playing Honkyoku, I think I try to step aside. So it's not so much about me as such. It's a tradition and I love it, therefore I play it. But do I express myself through it? I think we all do whatever we do, that's creative expression. You do come out with who are you. The complexity of you comes through the sound, and the way that it's interpreted, of course, is interpreted through me. So in that sense, I think it is an expression of me, but it's not my aim that I want to express myself. That kind of.
I see.
If I want to, then I will compose a piece or I will do some improvisation where I can do what I feel in the spur of the moment kind of thing. But as a honkyoku, I think, although it is an expression of me because you can't otherwise do, it's me playing, so it goes through me. But I would like to step aside, certainly.
That's an interesting way to describe it. Step aside, and it's almost like you're letting the past continue to communicate. And that's what we might do. Sorry?
Yeah, I suppose it is in some ways. But of course, it's expressed in the present by somebody who's living right now. So it connects, and it connects probably both the past and the future.
So we're going to do something very special on this episode in a minute. You're kindly going to play something, so that will be a first. Interestingly, we haven't talked about the theme of my podcast, which is this concept, Ikigai, which is greatly misunderstood outside of Japan. And it's not something Japanese really talk about in Japan, and it's very subjective.
Yes, it's very subjective, but it is used, the word and the concept, and
So, is playing the shakuhachi a source of ikigai for you?
After we had our conversation first time, I did think about this. I would say that the shakuhachi and me cannot be separated. I would be completely at lost if there was no shakuhachi suddenly in life. what is the meaning of my life. So one thing is the playing of the shakuhachi and creating art, if you want to say, composing, performing, and all this, and teaching, therefore passing in on what I love, that I'm so grateful that somebody else passed on to me, passing that on to others. But I also do a lot of community work for the Shakuhachi communities. So as you know, that I'm a founding member of the European Shakuhachi community, Shakuhachi Society, and I was also the chair of the World Shakuhachi Festival in Europe. I do a lot also to try to help Shakuhachi friends, because our world is constructed in a way that it's very power is unevenly distributed. So in a way, if I would think about my Ikigai, it's all connected to this. It's the Shakuhachi also gives me a platform to do something good in the world, if I may say so. It sounds a little bit, but yeah, I'm just taking a little part out of my life, then I'm the usual egocentric, idiot also at other times, surely.
I was going to say, it reminds me of another Japanese word, ibasho, and that the shakuhachi is giving you the opportunity to create an ibasho where you're connecting with other people who play the shakuhachi, and you have the shared experience, you echo the same values, you have the love of the instrument. There's comfort, it's your place to be. And that's actually interesting, definitely. A sub-theory of Ikigai. So yeah, does it offer you a place to be as well, to be yourself and connect with others?
I suppose in a way it does, although as Hafu, the half, the mixed racial background always gives me trouble. I've always fought a lot against, the Japanization of me. But
yes.
What can you do when you've also chosen to play the shakuhachi, right? It's almost my own fault. But the shakuhachi also taught me a lot about what is my resistance. Why am I resisting the Japanese-ness? Of course, I will never be a Japanese person. I am half, and I didn't grow up there, so I would never be able to represent a Japanese person like people like me to do at times. I don't know how it is to be a Japanese person. I don't know how it is to go to school, to work, in Japan. But still, the shakuhachi kept me focused. I couldn't run away. There's something very unpleasant about this whole racial tension.
Yes.
That occurs often in those of us who are mixed racial, and the shakuhachi made me not able to run away from it. So I had to see it. I had to kind of face my own racism, maybe. I had maybe a part of me that's racist, and those kind of things, I learned from the shakuhachi. So in a way that has been quite a journey. Yeah, so I find that very important, as well as the creation of, or maybe especially because I am of this mixed race background, and I know what it is to be excluded from a community. I have, with the creation of the European Shakuhachi Society, it was so important for me that we included all styles, schools, groups, approaches to shakuhachi on an equal basis.
Nice.
So yeah, so I think the shakuhachi has given me that. So it definitely part of Ikigai, definitely, and Ibasho certainly also.
Oh, good. Well, that's wonderful to hear. And yeah, I've actually wanted to. I want to be very honest and authentic about Japan and Japanese culture. I do have these ideas to explore, the lack of Ikigai in Japan, and Japan has all these problems. And I've also wondered whether or not I should do an episode on, what does it mean to be half Japanese, whether you're half Japanese and you do grow up there, or you're half Japanese and you don't grow up there. For the most part, I from what I know, it is quite challenging for people who are half. Maybe my son won't be, living in the world we do today and being part of a multicultural. And I think almost every student at his school, he's finished school last or 2 years ago, was half. It was sort of quite normal for people to be mixed race at his school. But I imagined when you were a child and growing up, it was probably, yeah, you were something unusual. You were half. And then when you left Japan, you looked Japanese. So everyone just assumed you were Japanese. So that's something I had to do. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And if you grow up in a very homogeneous country like Denmark, it's certainly a problem.
Well, let's stay positive and end with a piece of music. But before that, I should mention that people can reach out to you or listen to your music and learn more about what you do at your website, which is your name, kikuday.com. So KIKUDAY.com. Do you use social media, or is the website the best place to reach out to you?
The website. Also, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. And these kind of things.
And
I mean, I try not to. And YouTube as well. Yes, YouTube. I do actually have quite. I try to have activity. Like you. I do also interviews and translate so that people can, who don't have contact with Japan and who do not speak Japanese, can get in contact with ideas and people who have done research and what activities they're doing. So yeah, YouTube as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time and for coming onto the podcast, and really excited to hear what you're going to play for us. So would you like to tell us what you'll be playing?
Yes, I will play a piece called Honte no Shirabe. And this is the first piece that Okuda often teaches his students. He says it's very basic, but it's not easy at all. So you'll spend a lot of time on it in the beginning. So it will certainly challenge your patience from the beginning. And Okuda also says that it's the last piece that you may play for your teacher before, the teacher tells you that she does not have more to teach you, or so it's like the first piece. But this is also part of the Honkyoku concept. There's no piece that you just learn in order to learn and then move on. They will stay with you for the rest of your life.
I see. That's deep. It goes deep.
Yeah. So I'll play that. I'll play this on a quite new accusation of Shakuhachi. I don't have Shakuhachi of great makers and things like that, but this one is one such that I got recently last autumn, and absolutely love it. So I'll play it on this.
Thank you. Wow. It's beautifully haunting. There's this comfortable hauntingness to the piece, and you
Yes, indeed.
could easily get lost in it, just as the listener. It sounds very difficult for a first piece, so I think
it is very different.
when I learnt recorder, I think I learnt something very, very basic. So that does sound like a piece that would take almost a lifetime to embrace and be comfortable with playing. But that was lovely.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for letting me play and for having me.
It's my pleasure. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom and that beautiful performance. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. And who knows, maybe I'll take a lesson with you. I've only had one lesson, so I'm probably due for another lesson. So that could be my way to thank you. And so yes, kikuday.com is where you can go to listen to more beautiful music. And if you're interested, you could even take a lesson with Kiku. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for yours, and we'll speak soon.
Indeed. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ikigai Podcast. To learn more about Ikigai or to become a certified Ikigai Tribe coach, visit ikigaitribe.com.